Before we get started on that, a quick question. We have narrowed the field down for athletic directors. Move fast. So we'd like to set up a night for you to interview some finalists. We were thinking perhaps next Tuesday. Is that possible? We're just going on the presumption that we might not get the new budget.
I'd rather not, because I really wanted to discuss this meeting and talk to them about that.
About Wednesday the 4th.
It's Tuesday, but it's
We also have a superintendent search meeting
that night.
On Tuesday?
on Tuesday the 3rd.
How about Wednesday the 4th?
It's a district.
What time?
I don't know where I.
How about Monday the 2nd?
I mean, I don't mind music, and they don't like it. I don't have anyone out this year. Yeah, I don't mind.
But on Monday or Wednesday, decide.
Monday would be better for me, just because I have we have negotiations Tuesday, and then I have a baseball board meeting on Wednesday. I can't miss it.
Monday.
We could do Monday instead.
Is that something the board normally gets involved in, is the hiring of an MSAD?
They do call administrator.
The frontline administrators. Generally not so much the assistants, because we defer to the principals. We go on Monday.
Monday, does that work?
What time?
Historically, we brought 3, so we usually try to start at either 6 or 6:30, just so you're not here. It's about an hour, 5 to 3 hours, just to do the interviews, and then talk on it.
Are we,
So six.
Does 6 work or 6:30?
6 is fine. I can do 6:30 too. So.
Yeah, 6:30 is better for me.
6:30?
6:30.
All right, so AD interview 6:30 on the 2nd.
And are we going to get information ahead of time?
Yeah.
To review them?
Yeah,
It'll be kind of quick.
Well, that's why I was trying to have more
Yeah.
than 3 days. It's online, you can do it.
Sorry.
6:30.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
And we're doing that here?
Yes.
You said we got 4? Did you say 4? 3.
Interview about 8. Okay, you should have all received the second draft budget, and there's some hard copies of either without battery power or just because it's easy. I find it really hard to look at. And so those cuts are basically everything that we have talked about to this point. Just some notable things to point out. The SRO for the middle school is in there because that was a change we wanted. An additional half-time nurse, which I had talked about some time ago, is not. So we need to add that. That's something we want to do, especially with the 8th grade coming over. And at least at this point in time, the module for Hussey is still in. Because it's a very close call on what you want to do with that. And you can get 5 So anyone who had comments on the second draft? When we left last time, we had had a conversation of assistant superintendent's position and a curriculum person, and you had wanted to talk to some other principals. And Audric is here representing said principals. Some sense from there, this is like unorchestrated on our part, anything like that. So.
And I'm going to sit if you don't mind. I asked, we got feedback from the principals and the whole administrative team. The most detailed feedback we got was from the principals. So I wrote it down just because I want to be true to what everybody said. I want to make sure that I'm hitting everybody's highlights. So there will be some reading, but I hope not to do it too much. So just, the first thing I want to say is thank you very much for asking for our feedback on this, because it is a very important topic for all the principals and the administrators as well. All the principals are in complete agreement that our current model of superintendent and assistant superintendent is the most effective for us as principals as we lead the buildings. And it's absolutely due to the function of our work. When we have an issue that comes up, we need to contact Paul and Sue, the superintendent, assistant superintendent, immediately. And if one's not there, we know the other one is there and we can contact them. Some of the things that we have to contact the superintendent's office on are, legal issues, personnel issues, custody issues. We have a lot of custody issues. So they're very timely. If they're not addressed quickly, it can become very difficult very fast and we could have more issues because of that. So that's primarily how we all see it. So some of the other areas or things that we've talked about with the superintendent and the assistant superintendent, some of the things we need assistance on, as I said, personnel, curriculum, instruction, school and building facilities, technology, the law, labor relations. We have a lot of contractual things that come up for us. Staff and principal supervision, communication and interactions with parents. Sometimes, we have that trouble at that building, monitoring that, and we really rely on, having that parent go up the chain to be able to get some answers and some support that we might not be able to give them. Clarification of policy and our practice in the district, strategic planning, school safety, transportation, and food service. So those are all the areas that we look at for the central office to assist us in. A curriculum coordinator or a curriculum director, we see having a pretty limited scope of their job. Their job focus would be that of development of curriculum. Teachers primarily develop curriculum, at least in my experience, being a teacher and an assistant principal and now principal, in all the places that I've been. It's the teachers that actually develop the curriculum, and that you have somebody who can oversee that. So a curriculum director, that could be their main focus of the job. Where the principals get concerned with that is, for a district our size, if we have a superintendent and somebody running curriculum, if the superintendent's unavailable, that curriculum coordinator may not be able to have the depth and breadth of knowledge of all the other areas that we need help or assistance with. And that can be very difficult, as I said before, because everything is so timely with us that it can be very difficult to have that immediate communication. And you don't know from time to time, if you put in a curriculum coordinator position, someone might be, have superintendent certification. That doesn't mean 5 years down the line that same person's going to be there or you're going to have that. And so while the best intentions would be to get somebody with experience, that may or may not happen. So we're a little cautious about that. Curriculum coordinators don't necessarily evaluate the curriculum either. That might not be their area. The principals do that as part of their teacher evaluation process. We evaluate curriculum as well as how teachers are implementing the curriculum. So that's ongoing for us. We also felt that since curriculum instruction is already part of the assistant superintendent position and the superintendent position, their job descriptions, that it's really important to us, curriculum development, and feel that, we know it's very important to you, so just having a real specific charge to continue continue us working on that path is certainly the way we want to head, and keep going for that. So I'm just going to read this sentence because I want to make sure I get this right. So if the assistant superintendent position is removed, the principals are concerned that access to the superintendent would be more challenging for all stakeholders, potentially take more time, and that there would perhaps be a shorter tenure with the district as large as ours. And we are a very large district relative to some neighboring communities that have maybe a superintendent and not necessarily an assistant. And part of our success has been that we have two people in the central office able to kind of lead us and help set the charge for our district. And we've had very little turnover, which has been nice. And I think even hearing from Elva, I'm putting you on the spot right now, but Elva's done a lot of training, everyday math training in the state. And when she goes to some districts and they've had a lot of superintendent turnover, the teachers are quite unsettled and don't really know which way their district is going. Okay, yeah, we're doing everyday math now. Doesn't mean we're going to do that, when the new superintendent comes in a year. So that is a little bit of a concern for us as well. We know the position is a really complicated one. The superintendent assistant's very complicated, and that constant turnover is going to be a learning curve every time that happens for that person, and it's going to impact the district. So I heard back. So that's the principal piece. And as I said, I got very detailed feedback from all the principals. So the feedback that I got from a few other administrators didn't weigh in on a position. They didn't say, oh, we want this position over this position, but did say it's very important. It's obvious that curriculum development is important to everybody, and that should just be a real clear charge for us as a community to really develop that and flesh that all out. So that's the feedback that I have.
This is a very odd position to be sitting in council. Do you guys have questions for?
Yeah, I guess part of our concern wasn't so much, and correct me, board, if I'm wrong, isn't so much where we've been as where we're going to be expected to go, and whether people really feel supported in the face of having to develop a whole learning standards.
And part of our conversation, Ron, too, is, we have the Common Core standards coming out. So in a way, we're very well poised we have some very, very strong directive in that direction and some very strong charges from the state. So in a way, it's going to be easier because those foundations are already there for us. We just have to really focus in on and get there. And that's not going to be, in my own opinion, because I've sat on many curriculum development opportunities, and when it's more global, that's somewhere where you get bogged down. When you're really specific, you've got the Common Core that you're looking at. You need to incorporate that. You need a standards base. You need to be more standards based.
Right.
That's pretty clear cut.
And you feel like the system that we have supports like a consistency in that? I mean, it is a big district. So
it is a big district, and I think we've done a really nice job over the course of time becoming more consistent in all three towns. And I think, we've been working on the science curriculum, the everyday math. I know that there are some lingering questions about everyday math, but that has really made us very consistent in math. And when we have children moving from Lebanon to Berwick, they're almost in exactly the same spot, which has been really, a really helpful thing for them to do. So I think, we've got the right pieces in place. We're waiting for those Common Core to become, right, this is what you need, and then we're ready to take off because we've had a lot of good foundational work already.
I think what I'm also hearing on the board is more of a communication piece. And so to find out the math curriculum it's over here, but to find out this curriculum is over here, and for us to do our better job, a better job, having one person that we could go to and say,
ways to improve and look at a situation, okay, what do these positions offer us as a district? And I think that's one of the things with Paul leaving, gives us an opportunity to look at the whole structure and think, how is this working? Do we like the way it works? And that's why we need to get input from you to let us know how things are going. But I thought, for me, it was an opportunity to look at where we were. Is this where we want to go in the future, or are there other avenues to go down? So I think we were just doing due diligence to try to figure that out.
One thing that struck me, two things that has struck me recently about this, and one was last week, Paul said to you, collectively, that whatever decision you make, you need to make it because that could impact the new superintendent coming in. You might get a different candidate if they know that there's no assistant versus that. That really struck me. And then a couple of years ago, I was out for medical leave, an unplanned surgery. I was out for 6 weeks, and there was no assistant. And I did a lot of the work from home. But in this position, if you're alleviating the assistant superintendent, the superintendent is out. Who is leading the building? Who is leading the district? You need a that's my own opinion. But I sit on the certification committee for the Southern Maine Certification Committee for our district, for all of our administrators. So I am constantly thinking of certification. And if you don't have anybody certified as a superintendent, if you have a curriculum coordinator not certified as a superintendent, and your superintendent is out for whatever reason, that could compromise the functioning of the district. And that's just something that has recently, over the last couple of years come to me because of my work on the certification committee, but also because I was out for that time as well. So.
Would it be helpful for you guys? I actually sat down and developed just sort of the duties of the assistant superintendent, what we do now, and I broke it down into what is curriculum specific versus what's regular.
There's a guy in the back.
What's that? Oh, did you want to talk?
Well,
You can talk. Go right ahead.
You were talking.
Lock your hands out and you can talk.
Okay, so I think that's really good because it's important to know what function each position has.
In all honesty, this has certainly been a fun little chat
Exercise.
And no, I'm not being facetious at all.
Did you cry when you got done writing it?
This is what I do. This is what I do. And it's kind of nice to have it written out in a way that makes it. But one of the things that you need to know is that we have not done the best job communicating with you. This board is so new. And you don't know so much of what we do.
But there's been a
Why
lot.
would you? Why would you unless we have these conversations? So it is, I listen to the curriculum talk and I look at the administrators and we're like, we do all this. But we haven't communicated it well.
No, but we know that. And I don't think you don't. I'm not gonna lie.
Well,
I think my concern, don't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay.
But I don't want you thinking we don't think you do that.
No, I'm not, this isn't personal at all. I don't feel that way at all.
The moment for me, the reality moment for me was when Joe sat here that day, and I can't sort of get past it very easily, saying we need to start school late one day a week because he was going to need time to develop this stuff.
Well,
And that sort of stuck with me, and I'm thinking, wow, are we really doing what our part needs to be in getting to those cores if Joe feels that way? Because there's something else we can do.
who's driving the curriculum bus.
You need time to do it with the staff.
It's
Right.
It's necessary. So I understand why that would struck
But
you.
it's not where we've been. It's I think more for me anyway, where we are going to have to go. And that's a big project.
But so much of this is actually in the works already and moving forward. But we haven't communicated that with you because what did we do in the fall? We dealt with the Millennium piece and then we did the trans.
And kind of the restructuring.
Restructuring.
Yeah.
So it's really a piece of my biggest thing to think about a lot is specifically how can I communicate this better to you guys and how can you ask questions more freely so you feel like you know what you do. It's all. There's nothing wrong with the introspective piece that you try to figure out.
It's a big conversation.
Oh, it's huge.
And I think it also is on us too, because I think we need to work to be a more effective board. Because I think it would be great if we could have some professional development.
Yeah,
too.
I 100%
Sometimes
agree
we
with
get
that.
lost in the, what are we supposed to be doing?
Every time I think about setting something up, I look at people's faces and realize,
Another
I
meeting.
don't know how we're going to do this.
So, you know, it's
So
so important, so we know exactly what we need to do.
it is very hard, and I would agree 100%. I think that that's something that we just need to develop a plan. Because I'm more chance. It is, but it is what we need. Let's get it off, you know.
Yeah, it's not so much for me the positions as who that resource is and what everyone's role is.
Right.
It just seems that we get drawn into so much things that for me are more operational and that I'm looking for the superintendent to do, whereas the board can look at things that are curriculum-based and policy-based, and then there is delineation of that. And so when things come up like curriculum, having one person that we can talk to about it that doesn't have to say, okay, well, I'm going to have to go to this person and get this piece with this person to go to this piece. And maybe that's just maybe that's just the reality of it. But so for me, it's using this as an opportunity to sort of fine-tune roles, who's doing what, so that I can be the most efficient use of everyone's time.
Right.
So.
I don't disagree with it, and to be perfectly honest with you, if we had the funding available, I think a curriculum coordinator, in addition to what we do, would be really beneficial.
Oh, sure.
But, you know, one of the things that I just need to throw out is that there's always a piece of this that ties into the perception of so much administration in the district. And so, but reducing the position to a curriculum coordinator position, you really need to weigh whether or not that's benefiting you. You know, the district, the system, does it benefit the system in order to do that? For really not a lot of money difference, because the curriculum coordinators are not that far away from assistant superintendents in terms of their, and the certifications are very different. So it's just,
You're right.
food for thought. I know that that's just one of the,
Really necessitates the conversation.
it does, but what I would like to be able to provide you is the reasoning, rather than feeling like you're always having to, you know, to defend it. It's so you don't. So it's one of those things.
Ron?
I just was recollecting the other night, we were talking about this. I realized I've been here 10 years now. It seems just like a couple of years ago. And I came from Bonnie Eagle as a principal. And unfortunately, our superintendent was killed in a car accident. And so we needed to make some decisions. And unfortunately, the school board there, and it's a larger district than this one, and the school board there didn't do what you're doing, which is to ask the opinions of administrators and have this kind of process. What they ended up doing is, because they lost a lot of institutional knowledge, as we're going to, they made some decisions that weren't really grounded from the input from the people in the trenches, teachers, principals, other administrators, and they made a big mistake, and it didn't have to do with curriculum coordination stuff. And I was really thinking about this because it really set that district back a long ways, and I honestly, they're still struggling 10 years later.
What did they do?
Well, they ended up, they had a curriculum coordinator. And right at the time that Dr. Vincent was killed, he had always wanted that person to be an assistant superintendent. And just before he died, he did that. But what happened was that person really was a curriculum coordinator and couldn't really do the position of assistant superintendent the way it needed to be done. So when you lost your superintendent, you basically were leaderless. So, because that assistant was really a curriculum person and didn't have the context, the training, just the predisposition or the choice to be an assistant superintendent. So they selected another superintendent, again with very little input from, unlike what you're doing. They ended up going through a couple of superintendents since then, and it hasn't gone well. So I was just thinking about that and noticing how different this process is. And so I'm here to just say congratulations, because I think that's wonderful. And I've seen what happens when a curriculum coordinator is turned into an assistant superintendent, and it went very poorly. And they had so many changes that came upon them so suddenly that they made too many changes. And I think that's my fear here, is that since we're losing our superintendent, to make too many changes on top of that, I think could be dangerous. And the other piece of that is, I had this idea that when we talk about curriculum, I haven't discussed it with the other principals, but I had this little brainstorm thing that we all do curriculum work, but one idea would be to have each principal pick a discipline and become the quasi-curriculum contact for teachers, for the school board, if you want to talk about math, or if you want to talk about, social studies, whatever, that one of us would be a liaison, if you will. It's just an idea. I hadn't brought it up, I hadn't spoken to anybody about this. But there's a lot of knowledge in the principalships here around curriculum. But maybe a different structure would really help. And then we wouldn't lose the incredible number of duties and responsibilities that the assistant superintendent has. I firmly believe, after what I've been through all those years ago, that that's what we need. I'm speaking a little passionately about it because it was hard to leave that district, because I had, made great friends, but I could see where it was headed, and I know I made the right decision for a lot of reasons.
Wow, that's good to hear. And I think all of us have talked about how we need to get better. We need to find more ways and better ways to use the expertise of the people in the district. We're by no means thinking that we're experts at this table and can make these decisions in advance. So I so appreciate your having done that. That's exactly the sort of thing we need to do.
And we'll be sort of, to your point, we kind of go back and forth, because on the one hand, we're hiring a new superintendent, let's keep everything else the same, because goodness knows that's a lot of change. And on the other hand, you're saying, okay, well, we have a new assistant. This is a chance for a superintendent to come in, and maybe they have their own ideas about this. So it's just sort of, you go back and forth. There's like, okay, there's advantages and there's disadvantages to it, each way. So.
Anybody else? Particular subject?
Well, for me, it's sort of Rob's already touched on a little bit about having that person to go to who's responsible for no other duties, so that we can drive curriculum in the direction that we want it to go in the district. And I think what Sue had mentioned about being able to, if the financial piece of it was there, being able to add a curriculum coordinator and keep an assistant superintendent, I think that would be great. So I think at this point, it's just a matter of what direction do we want to go as a board. Do we want to have a person there dedicated solely for curriculum, or continue on the process that we're going and having somebody who's responsible for curriculum plus a significant amount of stuff.
And what do you
Like
do
you
with
just said, by no means are we experts on this, so how can we determine best if a new superintendent or the next superintendent can carry on these duties as well? Because I think a lot of these, not a lot, some of them are parallel.
Some are parallel, but they're all.
So
They're all
I think it's more of a, and I'm glad, thank you, Andra, for doing that, because I think it was definitely valuable. At this point, it's just really, where do we want to go?
And some of those duties that are on that sheet, in places that have a coordinator, tend to get pushed down to the principals. And
Right,
so
I mean,
they wind up being the 504 coordinator, like some of those sorts of things. So one of the things we try to do, we try to push things down to the building level and let them do their jobs, because they're the ones closest to the teachers and closest to the kids. So we've gone for a more generic approach that we'll do all these duties in the central office to try to keep them off of the buildings. And historically, if you go to more of our curriculum direction, they'll see they become more the responsibility of the superintendent, which is okay by me because I've got or they get down to the building office. So someone's going to do that work. It's just where does it go? So.
Like I have that, responsibility for like the District 504 coordinator and harassment officer. That's actually our assistant principal at our middle school does that.
Right.
divvy up some of that other, the other duties, maybe back up to the superintendent, over the business manager, down to some of it, down to the principal, somehow, that everyone can kind of get what they need.
And maybe it's a process of, you want to have that position focused for 3 years to get through certain things, you know, in terms of, and then maybe be able to pick up some of those responsibilities back on, just depending on where things are with the district and what, you know, it may be more fluid, it needs to continue to be a fluid position, is one of the questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think if the assistant superintendent can serve that function that we're looking for as a board,
Right.
for me, the title's less important than the function, but yeah, I don't know how doable that is.
Well, Sue functions in that role now. She represents us with your kind of curriculum group, which is either the assistant superintendents or the curriculum coordinators for those districts. Yeah, so she does a lot of other things too. So we certainly can have a conversation about focusing the position differently and parceling out some of those other duties where everything has some sense.
Yeah, and that's my concern. I mean, my concern is without dedicating something to curriculum, there's always something coming up. Right? There's always, like we talked about at the beginning of this week, district restructure. So, by no means do I think that you're not doing the curriculum portion of it. I just think you're being pulled in so many different directions that it makes it difficult. In that aspect of your job, I think you feel that way, but it's a very important piece. And
I definitely feel.
yeah, and we feel that way, I think. And for me, curriculum is top of my priority.
Well, and for both of them, that's actually the fun stuff of the job, because you're talking to teachers and you're trying to improve things. You know, the buses, and today I did power lines and bridges getting out, and that's not fun.
Right, so how do we structure it? And like Rob said, it doesn't necessarily matter what the title is. It's how do we make sure that the person dedicated for curriculum is doing enough of the curriculum stuff that we as a board want.
Right.
You know, and that's, how do we set that up? Do we set it up through policy, or do we set it up with changing titles? I think we can do it with policy. But it
Or
has
we
to
change the job description.
Right.
It's a job description, but it's something that I think if we don't choose to go to a curriculum coordinator as an assistant superintendent, then our next, course of action should be to assign those roles, assign those duties, and change that job description. Because I think the curriculum just has to have the focus.
Well, if that's a direction you want to go on, it would be helpful for us to take those duties, take it back to the team and figure out ways that we could move some of these things around in a way that the group feels comfortable with, and coming back to you with that, or?
Well, I think to define the duties and responsibilities of the assistant superintendent, we're bringing in a different superintendent next year, who may have a different perspective on what they want the assistant superintendent to do.
Right, you just need to make a decision about what you're going to do, because in terms of that, for hiring purposes, when you go into your interview, you want to be able to say to people, this is what we have for support structures in place.
About that, Eric? Well,
Yeah, well, I mean, we can do it. There's a couple of different phases of it. So we've talked as a search committee, because on the one hand, you're right. You sort of want to say this is what the job is. On the other hand, if you've got a superintendent coming in and say, I feel strongly that this is what I did. I've worked with an assistant superintendent. I'd rather be the captain of the ship, but I want to work with it. So a strong candidate with that kind of strong feelings about it, that might sway the search committee in one way. So I mean, it's all hypothetical at this point. So it's a matter of getting specific. But if you get too specific, if this is the next 8 weeks we're actually going through these interviews, we're going to want to have their input as well.
Well, what I hear you all saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is you want a curriculum focus, you're not as concerned about the title. And I'm hearing a little bit that it's not necessarily strictly a monetary thing, because the pay's not all that different. So unless you were being driven by trying to have an answer for the budget, you can take your time have superintendents who aren't that involved with hiring teachers.
Yeah.
We historically have been involved with hiring good teachers. It's
The first time, right.
So,
It is, it's like Rob said, there's some philosophical differences.
There are definitely districts that the superintendents have never met staff.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many people have said to us, you actually are named. I'm like, yeah, and we usually are not hiring for most of you. Because we do feel like it's an important aspect of, that's your.
You know, we probably should have that
in
list.
the first month of school, they've seen me more than in 10 years in their other districts.
We
So
probably
it's-
should
it's
see
a
that
philosophical.
before we do our interviews. Because like to Ron's point then, when we're interviewing people, we should sort of be thinking about, you probably know more about what are the sort of the differences between the philosophies.
Well, to be honest with you, in terms of the superintendent search, that you're not accessing Bob
I know.
is really odd to me because he's got all of that knowledge, and you can pick his brain and say, oh, well, maybe you don't like that about you, so let's see, in terms of those, philosophies and the things that we're going to run for it.
That list probably should, present, it's something we can use that to build some questions. That's it. Actually, where do we want to go next?
You have a budget, a second draft, with a 6.1% increase.
I would like to discuss the CAD. That's what I would like to discuss.
Yep.
I want to have that on our list for color.
On a list of what?
Well, we just went on a presumption that 6.1 is still probably a little higher than we wanted. And so we tried to figure out where there are other places that we could take a look at. So we've got a list that we want to just run a few ideas by to see what we thought.
CAD is on the list.
Okay, here's the list. Can we have the list?
Well, is there anything in the other piece first, though, before you, in terms of the changes that were made to the draft?
Well, I'd like to talk about, I don't know how you guys feel about, with the 8th grade coming, just having, not having to, they're still seeing between 90 and 125 kids a day down there, and we've had some high-risk situations this year. I mean, I don't know how they're going to do it. I mean, if you tell everybody to have your breakdowns and your issues between 9 and 1 when the second nurse is in,
What's the ratio from nurse to student?
well, if you look at the ECS, I think we'd be fine. It's
We
basically.
have more nurses than we should.
I know,
but yes.
from one building.
It's, was 1.5 to 1,000.
Really?
That'll be 1,000 here.
So maybe 1,200 next year.
Or 1,200.
When Pat first brought it up
Oh,
several meetings ago, even before we had the restructuring, we talked about having to have a nurse.
I did just based on the volume
Right.
they're seeing.
So we did
Yeah.
we did a little homework then.
Yeah.
And they do see about 90 to 100 kids a day, so there's a certain amount of volume. But in talking with the principals in terms of the Hussey nurse, let's say, or the middle school nurse, they were seeing a range of 50 to 60 with one person. So in terms of busyness, it seems kind of comparable, but certainly now that we're talking about adding another 200 kids, that kind of tips the scales, I think, a little bit. So,
The other thing to consider is, you're triaging for the health center.
Well, I think, that's the part of the conversation that is, the one piece you get hit in the public about is administration, and then the second one is house center
receptionists, right? It's two separate things. Okay.
So
So it's those two things plus Cindy Doe.
Plus any second.
Okay.
Yeah, and the.
So is that like 60 or?
No, oh, no, he's looking at 6,000. And it's 500. Yeah.
Well, there was a 20,000 piece. So what is that?
The 20,000.
The receptionist then?
The receptionist is outside. The 20,000 encompasses figuring stipends and building and just cost. So I was about 60. Yeah, total 6 on sales, yeah. Yeah. And could you have 6?
I mean, that's a concern.
No, the 20.
When then we're going to add on another
The
20
20 is
nurse. We're already putting out 60,000 whereas we need that nurse. It's a different thing than what it was presented in the beginning. And that's where I could always sell it then, but it's hard to sell.
To say that it was almost completely paid for.
Yeah, we have grants, we have people that are volunteer, you know, it's,
But we can't say that
we can't say that
anymore.
anymore,
60,000.
right? And then
She's coming out this
Bring
way.
this up last week when we were, I couldn't be here, but I asked Cindy to be here when you guys were doing student services, just in case these questions came up.
Remember that about it?
No. Okay.
That's fine.
I'm just, I think I've already had this question answered once, but is the increase in student visits to the health center due to our new offerings of?
That's what we're trying to.
That's what I'm saying, yeah. If we were just giving out aspirin, would we need another half-time nurse? Or is it because we're offering more, that we're getting more students coming, and then we need to give more?
And I think
I
that's.
just need to know that, that's all
I
I'm
think it's a
saying.
combination. I think you do have the health center traffic, but I mean, Lynn's only there, what, like 3 hours a day? Or
Yeah.
Yeah. But the rest of it is we have a high-risk population. There's a lot of, mental health needs. There's some, they have diabetics. I mean, there's a lot of just general stuff. I mean, I don't know of any other place, I don't know, that sees that many kids in a day. For me, a busy day at my school, I have, 450 kids, and a busy day for me is 35. Okay, I don't know of anybody who sees that volume. But I think we have a high needs population.
The variable there too is that we're one of the only, how many health centers are there in the state?
There's, in the state, in York County, there's only us.
Yeah, so we're the only one in York County, so there's a variable right there. Right? So
Well-
we have the health center, so you think that we see more traffic than other school districts, and I don't necessarily think our student population is all that much different than, say, Wells.
Yeah, it is.
Well,
It really is.
I think you could look at any snippet anywhere and just sort of decide, I think that it's because of the offerings, the amount of stuff that we offer to kids in the health center, that we see more kids. That's and I think that your point is a piece of it.
Yeah.
I think when there's a health center there, and a parent has, and trust me, it's a good option to have for a parent, I understand that. However, when it's there, and it's leaned on, and it's used instead of the alternative, which is taking your kid to the doctors, kids are going to see the health center more than if it's an easier option for the parent.
But I wish Cindy were here so she could
Right.
tell us, so she'd know the breakdown.
Yeah, we have the breakdown of,
Yeah.
because kids
We'll
don't,
bring it next time.
kids don't walk in.
Find out
If you can,
who's asked for the next health center.
We do get revenue back, the reimbursements. I think and to Pat's point, one of the reasons that I think some of the questions weren't asked when she was here, I didn't realize the different pieces in the budget. And I think,
That's all, I just want to be like, I just want to educate you that this is actually what it's costing us, because I think that it has been kind of like,
well, I got blindsided at a meeting with somebody who was asking questions about how much of it is in the budget. And I guess everybody was sort of, yeah, because we sort of, when it went in, the approach was, we weren't going to be paying for it, it was going to be grant funded. And now it's actually, the budget is different, and I think I want to make sure I'm talking about it the right way, so I don't look like I'm misleading people. And then they can pick it out of the budget, say, really? I just want to know what the numbers are. So I would like to know the reimbursement, because if you make a decision, then, what's that? Right.
It's fine.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm representing it
Yeah, I mean, I'd also like to see,
fairly and honestly.
Noble High School, number of kids visiting there, I don't know how far back the data goes, but pre-health center altogether, how many kids was the high school going to see once we
worked by Lynn, who is the nurse practitioner, and she saw 47 students in December. There were 7 days worked by Laura, who's behavioral, who is totally grandmother. And she saw 31 kids in those 7 days. And then there were, but in that day, I'm trying to, that's current year. So those are a total of 78 kids in a month period, which is December. And of course, that the number of days in December is probably, 16 or something.
Yeah.
As opposed to all the other kids who just come in for their daily, we have diabetic, we have kids that come in every single day because they are, need to be seen every single day.
And there's a waiting line too, because I've had, my older daughter, she'd call me and say, can you call the office to dismiss me? I say, no, go to the nurse. I said, I went there, she goes, the line's out the door, But my question, how many hours a day does Laura work generally? Is she half time?
She's 20 hours a week.
Okay, so the other thing that Cindy explained to me is, the social worker now is for special ed. So if Maura's not there, they see a lot of the mental health overflow from guidance. So here's my thing to you. Who in the school can you send a kid to that's having a breakdown or is in crisis? Guidance is busy, Maura's gone or not there or is seeing somebody. Where is the kid going to go?
Right, no, I totally hear you. I think we need to assess the cost.
Yeah, because for me, it's like, where do you draw the line between what the district is responsible for and should pay for and shouldn't pay for? I mean,
If we opened up a dental
right.
office at the high school, it would start getting used. It would. We would offer more, we would offer more.
Let's do this.
Yeah.
So if we
It's a
start,
great, useful program, but again, does it end up being wrong? I'm just going to understand.
And I think we're, closer to 51 than 61. So I think we're down. We had the clerical, the 20,000 for the medical director and some other things, and then the stipend for the health center director, about 51.
Okay, there's reimbursement that you said, you get that?
Insurance, right. Well, but there won't be for
They're
anyone.
working on it. That's what they're going through professionally right now, and they've actually been able to receive the Medicare reimbursement now, but they haven't got all of the other insurances on board.
But that wouldn't apply to what we're trying to appeal out here.
Our goal would be to offset this, that piece that's the 20,000 that's in there because it's, it basically is that medical director piece. Our goal would be to be able to offset that 20,000.
The 20,000.
But
Okay,
not,
that would leave us
that's
with
really
30,000.
school-based,
Okay.
just.
But that is,
Well, I think this is what's tough, because what we're trying to see is what we have to spend now because the health center's here, or is it because we have kids with a high need? What are we spending more on here? So if it's because we have kids with high need, then insurance doesn't address that, because we aren't on
If you
insurance.
didn't have the health center here,
Right.
would you still need 2 nurses just
Right,
because of the
That's what I
population?
think, that's what we're trying to get
I think
at.
that's what we're trying to figure out.
Right.
And I think that's what you have to ask.
so I would like to see, if the numbers exist, numbers all-together health center. Like before the health center even
many years
exists.
ago, let's see, it's probably been
15 years. It's kind of hard too because
when I was
the
a little
environment
school.
has changed dramatically in the last few
Yeah.
years. And a lot of people don't have
Kids without
insurance that
insurance.
they did have before.
There's also a lot less kids that are.
But I mean, we can give you some statistics from the days when the health center was not up and running well, because we had that piece in between where your hospital had to pull out for whatever their reasons were, and then we had. I mean, part of this is health center was, it used to be fully funded through your hospital.
That's the piece.
That's the whole point.
That's
That's
the
what we went into.
Now
Now we're paying
That's
them.
how we
You see,
do it.
there was never a public piece really that said, it's not being paid for anymore, and so now I know twice.
And I've been still saying that, and then it's like, oh
Yeah.
geez, it's
It's
not.
not.
And so it's
Right.
like, so you want to get part, I totally.
I would love to know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Occasionally.
Yeah.
So what did you guys talk about?
We talked about technology.
Oh, okay.
Yes, we did. Yes.
I had a question about the council at Northborough. I brought that up last
Yes,
time.
Oh, yeah.
we were going to talk about that.
Okay, go ahead. Never mind.
All right, so
Turn it.
assuming you wanted to probably not settle in the second draft, you probably figure out other things that might be worth at least protect programs, class size, and things that affect kids the most. But it gets harder, and we're going to start to affect them, but we're trying to have the least effect. So some of the conversations, the things that, if you wanted to look at a third draft, we thought were worth exploring. Since we're in a place where we're going to be doing some layoffs and not so much hiring, we thought we could turn back the teacher who mentors our elementary school people. Somebody does, we won't be hiring that many new elementary teachers, so she works 3 days. We thought we could cut that to 2 days and save about $12,000. As we continue our conversations around the design of the 6th, 7th building in the school, I don't know if you want to give the name, but we've had some lengthy conversations around just what would the structure be. Sue and I actually did a PowerPoint with the middle school staff last Friday, and there just aren't ways. We couldn't find a way to either keep the status quo, because that meant the 6th grade was a very different schedule than the 7th grade. We couldn't find a way to have the 3-person teams, which are at 6th grade, and spread out with either 4-person teams or 5-person teams or whatever. So, layout and rationale of the staff, I think, was relatively well received. And the suggestion is to go to 3-person teams in 7th grade on 6th grade. So the middle school will look more normal. That means we need 9 teachers, and we currently have 10 in the 7th grade. And as it happens, one of those teachers is elementary certified, has applied for an elementary position. We probably could make good use of them somewhere else without actually hurting someone. And she's a very good young teacher. So that's $41,000, $40,800, because we could eliminate one of the new positions. That's it.
I attended a training last Friday that was put together by Pat Hinkley, who is in charge of both facilities and transportation at the state. And she had a PowerPoint presentation, and in that presentation, it said that effective with the budget of fiscal 14, which is not this budget, but the next one, they were going to tie it specifically to fleet maintenance is one part of it. It's not set in stone yet, but pretty much that's how she wants to go. She wants 93 school districts, I think, right now are on it. When it came out 4 or 5 years ago, I think we looked at it, and then we saw a demo of it, and nobody was really impressed. They liked the VersaTrans much better, but from what they say,
But
it has
typically
come a
as the
long
state
way.
goes, they're going with it.
And they provide free training, free software. So they're linking it. It's not set in stone. That's the way it's going to go. But she said that's what she is pushing for. It makes it consistent. It makes everybody on the same software, which makes what they do consistent and how they do it consistent.
Who's they?
Well, all the different districts. Like right now, you have some that, for example, you have some small school districts that say it's not worth us for us to buy routing software. We're so small, it wouldn't help us.
This is similar to the issues that have been created in terms of it's a reporting thing. They want to be able to pull the data from all of the districts in a similar fashion. And when you're using different routing systems and not using routing systems at all, there's no consistent pulling of data. And that's really what this is about. It's the same thing that we did with the Meadows piece, Infinite Campus, exactly.
And they're pushing that it saves money. Because a lot of districts, again, are saying, you know, we're efficient as we can be, we can't save any money. And she has said that they've proved that wrong. And so they're now going to require districts to use routing software. And again, she is pushing to have it all the same software.
You can talk to your legislator if you want to about that.
I plan to call the commissioner.
Yeah.
Well, you know, again, I spoke to actually the VP of marketing for Tyler Technologies, who owns VersaTrans, called me on Monday morning and had a conversation with her. And basically she said it's definitely going to be tied to the vehicle maintenance, and that the other part was not set in stone yet. But the message I got on Friday was a little different than that, because I raised my hand and said, well, we have routing software, it's not this one, but it's another one. Would that satisfy the requirement? And pretty much she didn't think that that was the way they were going to go.
Yeah, I just don't see the avenue. I don't see the cost savings benefit to the state. And I see a potential cost, or an increase in cost for us. And
If
if
things
this
don't roll
routing
out.
software doesn't do what we want it to do, we could be back to the first days of school that we've had.
And I think what they're saying is they've tested it in enough places, and 93, which is almost half of the school districts, are now on it. And they're showing examples of where those districts have been saving money.
Are they rural districts or?
I think they're all over the map.
It's a wide variety.
And to
Several
their,
years ago, they piloted it, and we actually piloted it,
what was like it?
because it didn't work.
It didn't work the way, but it's been several years, and they've
I'm sure they could have
worked
taken
on
the
it.
bugs out or something.
We just had another option. There are those that didn't have the routing software, tried this one, and that was fine. But we already had one, and we were happy with it. So you don't really want to switch it together. You know, and it could be like Infinite Campus and the Power School thing. You know, they said everybody's going to Infinite Campus, and then they came back and said, well, if you haven't made the switch, you can stay on Power School. We'll support both Power School and Infinite Campus. It could be that they ultimately say, as long as you have some software, we'll consider that to satisfy the requirement. So I think that's the way they want to go. Where it ends up, I think, is still up in the air. But their point is, you save $5,000 a year on your annual maintenance, and you get free training at their annual conference in July up at Sugarloaf. So why wouldn't you? That automatically saves you $5,000 a year.
It could cost us more.
Well, the good news is that it's the way that the VersaTran contract runs, we just re-upped it, didn't we?
Yeah.
So
We pay it
we're
in
good.
February, March.
So we could even run parallel for a while to make sure that we have the things, work the way we want them to work if we do any switches.
So, the next one a little speculative. We have budgeted $3.80 a gallon both for diesel and heating oil. And Denise and I are on that daily. As of this morning, biodiesel was $3.65 a gallon.
Oil was $3.46.
$3.45. And the trend seems to be a little downward. So we're hoping between now and when we finalize the budget, we can lock in at a price that's somewhere south of what we budgeted and take some money out. You can always let it ride and try to hope it goes down because it's likely to go up. So our thought is if we can get maybe not a great price, but even a halfway decent price that is less than what we budgeted,
Yeah,
we want to do that. And
our goal is to like, as soon as it
save
gets
some bucks.
3:30, we fuck
Are
her.
we still pooling with North Berwick for any of that stuff?
Yeah, we buy gas, the police department gases up the cruisers and then reimburses us. So,
What about heating oil?
not so much. We talked about it in the past, but what happens is your price is based on volume, but it's also based on the size of your box. If you've got a 10,000 gallon tank, like we did at high school, and they bring a tractor trailer in, you get a really good price. The towns tend to have very small tanks because they're just small buildings, so they can't quite get the price that we usually can. The next two things that do have some impact on kids, well, we think they're at least worth the conversation, and they're somewhat interrelated. One was to cut back by 50% our intramurals. It saves about $15,000, spend about $30,000. And then if we're running fewer intramurals, our thought was to cut the activity bus to 1 day a week, which saves about $20,000. And then, if we don't have activity buses, we have a number of ed techs in the special ed realm who basically stay after school and do what's called a help block to help kids. It's not big numbers, but it's certainly our kids that can use a hand. If we reduced all of our 8-hour special ed techs to 7 hours, so we don't do that help block, we're anticipating we have fewer kids taking it if we're not running activity buses. That's about $52,000. We don't love it, but compared to class sizes or staff during the day, we thought that was something that was at least worth exploring. And then finally, in this first draft, we reduced Blue Cross to 7%. We do not have an official letter, but the word on the street and checking with my colleagues is it's going to come in at 4. So there's some additional amount of money we can take out of medical in a third draft.
What do we know on that, Paul?
They were a little early, because usually we get a letter mid-April. They're telling me the MEA, the local associations, that's what it's going to be. So the word is kind of out there. So I think that's what it's going to be, but we don't have a letter or anything.
And the only thing I want to address, this is my topic with Paul, a lot, with the medical insurance. We can cut down to 4% to reflect the increase, but I feel strongly that we need to have some sort of a reserve for people that change insurance during the year. And usually what happens is if we budget down to 7, that gives us, was it $50,000 between the 4 and the 7? Probably that'd be like 50,000, 60, somewhere in there. So that covers maybe, so maybe 80. That covers only somebody going from single to family, like if someone has a baby and they go on to a full family plan, that only covers 5 or 6 individuals. And in a district that size, we really need some sort of a reserve to cover those costs because they have to happen. And they're not discretionary. So if we do cut down to the 4%, what I'd like to do is set up some kind of a reserve to bump it back up so that we can use it throughout the district for those people that change mid-year.
Which we do now.
Historically, we haven't received the information until we've pretty much finalized the budget. So our buffer has been, we think it's going to be 7, and we use that for the 7% that's extra to cover those changes during the year. This year, where we found out so early, we could go down to 4%, but then we would need to set up some kind of an amount to cover those mid-year changes.
So our recommendation is maybe we just cut it to 5 or 6. I think there's a little more that we can take out.
Last week, Paul, I had asked Chris about maybe a 5-year plan on technology purchases. You know, if he's made any headway with that.
Well, when he told me about the steady state at Semi, I presume that was a part of it, but I'll double check it. I know he was, knowing that's what he needed.
I think he knew that. Yeah, I think he was working on that other piece, the questionnaire piece.
Here, for us, sorry.
Right, yeah, so.
I just want to make sure that it doesn't get forgotten,
Right.
because I'm going to want to see that before
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think that's
And I'd also like to consider, and I know that you're retiring, but maybe as a board, have some discussion about maybe a comprehensive facilities plan, something that looks out a little bit further from.
That's a committee. I think we should have a committee that does that.
And maybe have like a 10-year plan, decide, kind of laying out what we want to fix from year to year to year, so that we don't have to keep cutting the green carpet.
Yeah, good idea. Like Bob did with Brooke. They went and looked at the committee, looked at everybody and assessed everybody's needs and talked to everybody and tried to prioritize.
So we've got
Instead of saying, this year we want to do $250,000 in facility work, we could say, our budget's going to look at doing $100,000 every year in facilities work. How does each of the buildings fit into that plan and prioritize it?
we've actually got a skeleton one, because we do follow. But it tends to be the big ticket items, like I can tell you when every roof needs to be replaced, or when every boiler does. We haven't gotten as granular as the green carpet. So
Actually, we've got
there's a plan we
very
follow,
specific
but
about
if you want to
flooring.
get really detailed.
Yeah, like kind of what you were talking about when we did the tour in this building, where, hey, we'll do one pod this year, and then 2 years from now do another pod, flooring wise, and just, I'd like to be able to see it out on at least a 5-year plan, not even a little bit more.
To Rob's point, though, I think that there's a part of that you don't want to be doing at these board meetings.
Yeah.
But a committee, it might be a
Or even just an update for you guys.
for a committee. Yeah, that might be helpful for us.
Or just bring it out at budget time, these are the things we think we need to do this
Right.
year, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I have a question about antennas. Under the regular instruction. I just went down through this, and it seems to be an awful lot of fuzzy. Is that because we have, there's like 11 at techs at fuzzy, 5 in Lebanon, 8 in Oak Grove, 4 at the high school, and 2, it looks like 2 were cut from the middle school, and only 3 at the middle school.
Which list are you looking at? Is it in regular instruction or special ed?
That's in regular instruction.
Okay.
And I just didn't understand why there are 2 cuts, and I think
Lebanon, the other piece of it.
Lebanon has a Title I, most of it.
Right, so teachers paid in the Title I realm are not under the regular instruction piece. And because Lebanon is the highest percentage for reduced, they get most of it. So Huzzy has, I would say it's a similar, proportionate amounts of effective buildings.
deal with the rest of the kids. It seems like you're doing a disservice to the students left in the classroom if the teacher can't handle one. Yeah, we get rid of their one option that they have.
I guess how much, it would be good to know how much it's used now and who is in there. Is
I've
it the eighth
actually got
graders
that
mostly,
data,
or?
and I can give it to you next time.
Okay, it's more the eighth graders anyway, or it would be interesting to know.
Right.
They may not be that good.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, what happens is, but also you want to know what's the situation with the sixth graders, you moving up?
Right.
You know, they those kinds of-
Well, we've got that data, so we can make the case, so
Just that their teachers need that support and hate to take that away.
I don't want to take anything out.
I know.
We're just trying to do the least damage, and we're looking at if the building is looking more like an elementary school,
Right.
is important. But you raise a good point, and we'll give you the data.
Thanks. And first teams, they're
They're not.
not.
Said no. So our thought was, we have really nothing planned for next Thursday. We do like meeting with you so much that we thought we'd use the 5th as another budget meeting and give you the third draft with some of the things that we've talked about, unless there were anything here that raised anybody's hackles. Now, we really don't want to talk about intramurals or whatever it is.
So I mean, everything that all the cuts that you listed, that's that 787 and 958, with the exception of the after school.
Okay. This second draft has all the cuts that we talked about in prior meetings.
Yeah, right.
Everything that I just talked about right now is not in there.
Okay. And what does that represent? All those?
It's not cut out.
Right. If you did all of them and it does indeed come to pass that we save a little on oil, and you do decide to go to lunches at $3 oil, it's about $300,000 more.
And cuts, and did you with the percent, but that brings the percentage down to
5.2.
What's that?
5.2.
I'll just say I don't think we can manage that.
Yeah,
So I don't like, I don't know.
I'm not sure I like getting rid of the health line either.
You said it's about 500. That's 500.
Yeah, I don't like
Very
the
heavy dollars.
the 7 hour.
So that's about 1.7
would
would be the increase instead of 2.
Yes.
And you said it's at 5 point.
The help
5.2.
cutting that,
Well,
that's
and to
more,
be
I
honest,
think
we, you know, aren't gonna give us, not all the kids, but a little short on the horses there.
yeah, no, that's, I don't, that's what I like about cutting their hours.
It's true, it's really hard.
I mean, I would rather cut the resource officers, school resource officers, before I cut health block for kids.
Yeah, I would agree.
Not that we have to choose between the two.
Just to put it out there.
The thought is that we want to keep the SRO in there, at least for the next year, to see how the 6-7 middle school process works.
Right,
You know, so I don't want to be.
taking the health block away.
Yeah, taking the health block away when it's,
Yeah.
I don't,
But then you certainly need the bus. So you probably less
Right, it
use
was, right.
if we don't have the bus.
We can go to 2-day, I mean,
We can,
we can play with this some. We're just, none of us are great choices.
I mean, and we can do instead of, we can just, go to 2 days a week in terms of the additional block, so it doesn't affect people too bad, but, you know, so gives them a schedule and everything.
And did you guys have, how many kids take advantage of that help block? Roughly, is it a
You know, it really impacts the middle school the biggest.
Yeah.
And, you know, Dan said that on a given day, it could be just a half dozen kids up to 3 dozen kids. You know.
So it depends what's going on.
It really does depend. So, and
it's really light.
Yeah.
And I think as weather gets nicer, it's even lighter.
Yeah, right. And you know, that may be a case where you say we're going to run this for a certain part of the year when things are, you know, during, right before grades close and, you know, those kind of things.
If it were to be cut back, though, do you think there would be a more consistent, higher number of kids on the time that's on?
Yeah. So we're here Tuesdays and Thursday nights. This is the night to get your support. Yeah. That's very
So it serves the same amount of kids. but just the two kids.
It's a little more efficient.
And that was an overall savings that wasn't.
It's a combination of everything.
Cutting the in-mills in half is 15,000. Going to Monday for the activity bus was 20,000. And cutting all the 8-hour and tests to 7 was 52.
So it's 87 total. If you cut that in half.
And it means that a 40-hour week person is only 35 hours. So it's like, you run 2 days and you're going to 37 or something.
Is there any sense for how used the intramurals are?
So you encourage these students?
Do you know how many kids are taking advantage of the intramurals?
It totally depends on what's being offered. It's like what's out there. At the high school
A
level,
sense for how much it's, if we take it away, it's going to be a big deal.
I'm not really sure. I feel like a lot of good reason.
you can get like the numbers.
Pretty good. It's taking something that encourages kids to get up and get exercise as opposed to.
I think it is primarily that middle school group of kids that use it the most.
Maybe we could focus that too. Just the younger kids.
I mean, and the other piece about the antics, the reality is most of our antics are seminar. So we can just put that on perspective. This is what I don't do it.
Oh, well, if you run it in one place, the busing isn't so much driving between the middle school and high school. It's taking the kids back to
Right.
11 or whatever.
That won't change.
So just running in one school doesn't save you a lot of money. It's, the better would be to offer just 1 or 2 days.
Right.
in
So you
multiple
can do that with
sites.
intramurals too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, yeah, we want to go. How much does the lunch going to $3, how much did you calculate that would save us?
As I recall, we could take the 80,000 allocation that we
Oh, that's right, that's right, we did talk about that. Okay.
that will be on the 12 year numbers, which is what we wanted.
And did we get a definitive answer yet from the YMCA as to whether or not they're gonna offer programs at Knowlton next year?
Have you heard anything about that?
Over weekend bus.
I thought we heard yes.
I thought so too, I thought we heard yes.
I remember them saying that they'd be willing to do it,
Yeah.
but, yeah.
I'll stick on.
Yeah, I really want to do
Because
it.
I wanna be able to
It's not like
decide,
it's great.
because
Is she still here?
we do the busing,
Right.
that's gonna incorporate some costs into it.
Well, no, because there's already a bus that goes. It's a bus that it's already going, it's not a question, it's just a question we
We
want to.
would do it anyway, because it's going to be the 4th and 5th
Right.
grade building for the town. We'll
So
have buses going.
I almost think it's better to have it in one localized spot, because you're gonna have brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
It would be, parents go to one and then the other, pick them up.
Well,
That's
yeah.
the point.
Yeah, most of the parents I talked to said rather have a bus.
Right,
Right.
yeah.
Any idea of what the mill rate would be with this revised at 5.2 or even 5.1 with all the cuts to intramurals on how much that would actually affect? What percentage, 87,000 is
Yeah, that would, I was gonna say one, 12.
112, 115?
Yeah.
15's right.
Well, see, I use the state valuation, and that's always a little different from the town. So. But Berwick is valued at $600,000 concerns about reducing the mentor person, the 7th grade person, CAD, the iPads, the social worker, the Versa trains. So the things that there seems to be some consensus around, we'll take out of a third draft, or we'll leave the ed techs and the activity bus and the intramurals alone until we get some data, and then there's a little more direction around that.
So you want a third draft with those cuts, and then we'll go to a fourth or whatever one we decide.
Do you want to do the help?
I'd see the half day, I would think that they're making 2 times.
Two
Yeah,
jobs.
I think
Yeah,
that's
build
what I
it
do.
too. Build in the 2 times.
Yeah, build in the 2, but I'd still like to see the numbers.
Alright, so we'll run the activity bus 2 times. We'll cut the help block only in half. Okay.
And we'll get more health center.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Health
I-
center.
I've got to break down the health, comprehensive facilities plan, 5-year plan for the iPads.
Or technology in general, is what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
technology in general, I guess, like back to my original, and I don't want to open up the conversation again, but it's, my concern is what the 5-year plan looks like, and if the intention is to incorporate the iPads into the curriculum or not, because that's what scares me, because it kind of buys us into having to have them. So what's the plan for the iPads besides just using them in the function that we're using them now over the course of the next?
I mean, that would kind of be my question though, is that Chris's decision to make, or is that, like, one of the discussions about a curriculum
About
coordinator? I mean, I don't think that's really, Chris doesn't know about,
No,
knows
I
that. So,
yeah.
I think that would be a big leap for him to make that, it would be
So-
more so what we're talking about.
Or teachers are making, I don't know who's making.
Right, but
yeah, but it
but
should
right
be a
now, he's
thoughtful
kind of
one.
making the decision, and it's coming back to what are we doing with it once we get it, to a
I'm not
point.
sure, what he's deciding is how many units people need, but I'm not quite sure who's deciding. I think teachers are deciding how they're being used.
Yeah,
And
which,
having read the
Based on
feedback was interesting, but I sort of get your question after reading teacher feedback. It's sort of, I see what they're doing, but even they're saying, a lot of them are saying maybe we could use these more or better, or,
Right,
what
so
is
what does
that?
that mean?
Right, yeah.
what
So-
does that mean?
Right, what does that really mean? Yeah.
Like not getting all free apps and actually purchasing some
Well,
apps. That was one of the.
Yes, but yeah, or whether there's apps, just how, they're all saying it really does engage kids are, and that's great, but you're right, if we're gonna start using them in a way that buying apps or doing curriculum development, then that should be a thoughtfully made plan,
Because as much as these are
but
benefit,
it's measured.
right, these are benefit to the district, they're integrated into the district law. And there's no way they can go away. It'd be very difficult. And I don't want to get there with the iPads unless we decide
That's the right thing.
where we want to go as a district.
That's prudent.
I have another question for Chris, I'll send it to him, and it's more, I think this is one that I've just sort of been struggling with myself, and then it came up sort of incidentally, and I've talked to a couple teachers about it. So teachers now have this and the iPad.
Yeah.
But I get it, because I thought I was going to get rid of my laptop when I got my tablet, and I had a brief conversation with Chris about that, about how. So that's something else I think we should just address, because I didn't realize that they both, but I understand it, sort of.
They make keypads. They
For-
set the iPad into.
It doesn't change that you can't
It
do.
wasn't so much that, it's a print.
You can't do that.
Although there's a
You
print,
can't.
Well, they make
print
air-
function or a print app coming.
They're coming, it's coming, but you can't, there's problems with it. And then connecting to that,
They all come in, I think?
the elementary,
Something
Oh.
here.
The
They
elementary.
connect to that. The iPad's
this,
They told us 90.
all
this,
connects to that.
through this, you connect
But
to
through
this.
Oh,
Yeah.
But then we're talking,
That's what I found out.
and talking with some teachers too, there's like, and I don't know much what it's going to be, but like there's Adobe things that you can put
Yes.
teachers have the kids use their
Theirs,
own.
yes, yes,
Yes,
yes,
that is true.
yes.
So
And a lot of what
Because
they
that's
do-
the one they have every day, so
Right.
they do have some
That is
used
true.
in their,
Yeah.
you know, in guided reading and stuff.
It can be a reward in some, I mean, I know.
Right, so maybe that's how we look at the possibilities,
Yeah.
is that's
That's
that
what
one.
it is, yeah.
So we're looking at a budget workshop next Thursday,
Is that what we're talking about?
Well, you need to keep moving along.
and what's going to be, what will be the agenda that we're going to look at, the third
I'm
budget?
gonna give you a third draft based on the direction you just gave us, and then you decide if that's where you want to be or also further.
That's right.
I guess, I mean, that would be my other question though about the 70 iPads that's now they're talking about getting, because I know a lot of them were to give to the people that he didn't give in the first round, and I'm not sure if, and it was,
Like, what is that for? You wanna-
yeah, do they really need them at this point? Or if we're looking at, we'd rather try to get them more into the classroom, I mean, where's the,
Yeah, that's a good question.
You want to call it right?
Anything else?
We're looking at 3 nights next week.
Yeah, no,
Research
we're just
plans.
looking, everybody's gonna be, pretty much everybody will be through.
Looking at like, if we're gonna do the interviews on Monday, if we could have a job description.
That would be
of what the
really
athletic director does,
Yeah.
because it's a very difficult job. And also a range of salary range, because I think sometimes we are kind of shocked or taken aback when, it's there and we have to make a decision and we haven't had really time to think about it.
Arranging your account?
Yeah, that would kind of be great.
also, remember you had the question though about, and you want to talk to Kyle about,
Yeah,
like, how
Oh,
we,
the exit
that was,
interview.
because I'd like to know what the,
do you want to talk about what were his challenges and?
yeah, we don't have time, it was Monday.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And-
Right, oh, you're just talking about private interviewing or?
Well, no, but I think it's important for us to know
Absolutely.
what he found most difficult.
I want to ask Kyle to email the board a summary history of
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Exactly. That'd be wonderful.
Let me see, how's this work as far as, so Monday we interview and we chat, and then is that it, pretty much?
We make the decision that night.
That hire.
But I mean, it's that night, it's not.
It doesn't have to, I mean, historically, the board has kind of stayed and chewed on it until they could direct me off the job to somebody. But there's no requirement, and I know some boards who sleep on it and talk about it at some other meeting, so it really is
Well, and I got time.
it's up to you, and it depends on how comfortable.
You know, I feel like there's the bags and just keep out of it.
So you said 7 o'clock next Thursday?
Yes.
For the budget.
Thank you. Can you guys, do you mind a brief executive